Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on London Prodigal and we get to hear from Old Flowerdale today in Act 1, Scene 3. But oh no, we haven't seen Act 1, Scene 2. So we've got a lot that we got to cover today because today's monologue actually comes from the very end of Act 1, Scene 3. So we're going to do quite a bit of a recap. Hold on to your horses. In the first scene, we basically met the Flowerdale family and learned that Old Flowerdale is in disguise. He wants his son Matthew to think that Matthew's father, him, is dead, but he's in disguise and got himself into the service of Matthew as a servant named Christopher. Uncle Flowerdale was a little bit annoyed that Matthew is such he's not dependable. He drinks, he swears, he gambles, he doesn't keep his promises, stuff like that. So Old Flowerdale is going to be sort of keeping an eye on him as that goes along. But Matthew also wants to marry this woman named Luce, and he had asked for money so that he could go and try to court her, which Uncle didn't want to give, but then Old Flowerdale convinced him to give, and Old Flowerdale, in disguise as Christopher, also made it out to sound like he's fairly wealthy. So Matthew is okay with having him in his service. So that's basically Act 1, Scene 1. Oh, and there was also a fake will from Old Flowerdale. Act 1, Scene 2, we're at a bar in Croydon Fair where they have since gone. Matthew, at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, Matthew is like to Old Flowerdale, he's like, get some better clothes and you can come with me to Croydon Fair. So Act 1, Scene 2, we're in Croydon Fair and we're hanging out with Sir Lancelot Spurcock, who's the father of Luce and also Delia and also Francis. And remember, Matthew wants to marry Luce, but Spurcock is there and he's drinking with Master Weathercock, who also wants to marry one of Spurcock's daughters. He doesn't seem really picky about which one, which is a little weird. But he's there with Weathercock and his servants, Artichoke and Daffodil, and Francis and Luce are sitting over there drinking nearby. So he sends Artichoke home because he's apparently gotten drunk enough. And then he makes a comment about how Daffodil's gotten really saucy. And then he and Weathercock turn the conversation to the fact that Weathercock wants to marry one of Spurcock's daughters, but Francis has already turned him down. Francis has apparently already turned down like 7 different suitors, and they're not quite sure what to do there. So then we flash over to Luce and Francis and they're like, oh, they're talking about who we're supposed to marry. And then we come back to Spurcock and Weathercock and they're talking about the fact that Delia doesn't like any of her suitors, but Luce has a couple of suitors who are maybe kind of okay. And then the focus shifts over and we meet Master Tom Civet. He enters and he sees Francis and he thinks that she's gorgeous. So he goes over to Daffodil and he's like, who is that woman? And there's humorous back and forth and wordplay and all that sort of thing as it's going on. But he gets out of Daffodil that her name is Francis and that she is likely still single. So he's like, barkeep, send some wine over to the pretty lady over there, because he wants to use that as a method of introduction. So then we come back over to Spurcock and his crew, and they're placing more drink orders and all that. And Matthew and Old Flowerdale, who's disguised as the servant Christopher, come in. And Matthew is like, Weathercock, Spurcock, oh, my great friends, how great to see you. And hey, Spurcock, like, look at all this that I've got. And, if I got to marry Luce, she'd have all of this and I'd treat her so well. So he's like laying it on. But then the wine that Civet sent over arrives and they're like, who is this from? And Civet comes over and he says hello and he says that he would like to marry Francis. And everybody's like, well, let's go to Lewisham and we'll keep talking about it. And Spurcock goes to pay and they're like, no, Civet has already paid. And he's like, oh, you do us wrong. But I don't think that it's really like a you do us wrong. I think it's like oh, you shouldn't have picked up the bill for everybody. But thanks, because that means you're wealthy. So then they all head out to go to Lewisham. And that's the end of Act 1, Scene 2. So Act 1, Scene 3, we're on a road near Spurcock's house because Spurcock and crew are going to be coming back there. And we meet Sir Arthur Greenshield, who is one of the men that wants to marry Luce. And he's there with Oliver and his lieutenant and some soldiers and whatever. And he's like, send the soldiers off to the ships. They'll get paid when they get there. So the lieutenant and all the soldiers leave, and it's Greenshield and Oliver who get into it a little bit. Like, Oliver doesn't seem to think that Greenshield is a very good commander, and Oliver is also written with a very, very thick accent. It's sometimes difficult to understand what it is that he's trying to say because of the the dialect in which he's been written. But they have a little bit of back and forth there. But then Spurcock and Weathercock and Matthew and Old Flowerdale and Luce and Francis come in, and there's introductions made all around, and Matthew and Oliver sort of start to get into it a little bit. Matthew just like starts poking fun at Oliver, but Oliver has like a really short temper, so he takes it all very personally and gets really riled up about it, until finally Spurcock is like, okay, enough of that. I'm guessing that you all want to know who gets to marry Luce. And they're all like, yeah, we'd like to know that. And Luce herself doesn't seem super thrilled by this whole thing. She gets like one line where she's like, yeah, this seems to be super great, whatever. But she does have an aside to Green Shield, where she says, if I got to pick, I would pick you. And then Spurcock is like, Green Shield, you're great, but you're poor and you're not noble. And Matthew, like, I get it, but you're a little bit of a playboy at the moment. You're a little bit unreliable. But he's like, ultimately, I prefer that Matthew marry her, but she gets to pick. I'm not going to force her to marry anybody. She gets to pick. So then Artichoke comes in and he says that Civet has arrived, and Spurcock is like, sure, let's hear from all of the suitors all at the same time. This seems like a good idea, and too bad like my daughter Delia doesn't want anybody, because we got all these suitors lying about. So then they all leave to go meet Civet, except for Matthew and Oliver and Old Flowerdale. And Matthew tries to get in a word with Oliver, but Oliver's like, no, you're not worth my time. And he leaves as well. So Matthew turns to Old Flowerdale, who's Christopher in disguise, who's disguised as Christopher, and he's like, so what if more suitors keep showing up? Like, the more competition there is, the less likely that she's gonna pick me. So what do I do if more suitors keep showing up? And Old Flowerdale says, I do not mean that you shall meet with him, but presently we'll go and draw a will, where we'll set down land that we never saw, and we will have of it so large a sum, Sir Lancelot shall entreat you take his daughter. This being formed, give it Master Weathercock, and make Sir Lancelot's daughter heir of all, and make him swear never to show the will to anyone until that you be dead. This done, the foolish changeling Weathercock will straight discourse unto Sir Lancelot the form and tenor of your testament, nor stand a pause of it, be ruled by me. What will ensue, that shall you quickly see. So he's hatching a plot for another fake will. He's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go draft up a will that says that you have massive, massive tracts of land, and that Luce would be the benefactor of all of it. And we're gonna write it up and like, no, we don't have this land. That's fine. But we're going to write it up and seal it and make it look all official. And then we're going to give it to Weathercock and tell Weathercock, don't show this to anybody. But Weathercock is terrible at keeping secrets. So he's, of course, immediately going to show it to Lancelot. So Lancelot Spurcock will know that his daughter would inherit these massive tracts of land if she marries Matthew. So obviously he's going to side with Matthew, sort of regardless of how many other suitors show up. And he's like, just sit back and watch. You'll see, it'll work. So taking a fake will and planting it with a blabbermouth and telling him not to blab, it's going to get blabbed and everybody's going to know. And Matthew's like, actually, that sounds like it could be a really good idea. Let's go do that. And that's the end of Act 1, Scene 3. So, whew, that was a long one today. And tomorrow's monologue is from Act 1, Scene 7. So buckle up. Tomorrow is also going to be a long one. I warned you, since this one's a comedy, there's not as many monologues. So we're going to have a lot of just me talking at you about what's happening. But it is, so far as I'm reading it, it's pretty cute. I might recommend that you go find a copy and take a look at some of this stuff yourself. But anyway, in the meantime, come on back tomorrow for more. I'll see you then. Mwah.